Is about percents, and we're going to show how we can use proportions like in the rest of our unit to help with percents. So first of all, let's talk about converting percents, okay? So if I start with a decimal, for example 0.72, how can I turn that to a percent? So I have a decimal, I want to convert it to a percent. To go to a percent, remember percent is out of 100. Percent. Any of you that take French, you know that the word for 100 is cent. So per 100. Okay, so out of 100. 72, the 2 right now, well, what place is that? That's in the hundredths place. So that's 72 hundredths. So that is 72%. The shortcut is just to slide it over twice, okay? Use a different color to kind of show that. But the shortcut is to slide it over twice, the decimal point. But just look at the hundredths place, and that's what should be in the ones place because it's 72 out of 100. Okay. Obviously, we already know how to turn a decimal to a fraction. We did this earlier. Same thing. It's 72 hundredths, so it's 72 out of 100. Then you just look to simplify that. So I could divide by 2 and get 36 out of 50. Divide by 2 again, 18 out of 25. And at that point, there's nothing else I can do. So that's the simplified version. Okay? Let's show another example. So let's say we start this time with a percent. So if I have 135%. Okay? So to go from a percent to a decimal, we're going to move the decimal like we did before. But instead of moving it to make it bigger, we're going to take the decimal that's right there and move it to the left to make it smaller. Every time we move it 2 places because percent is out of 100, 2 zeros. Remember the shortcut for multiplying and dividing by 100 is to move it 2 places. Okay. So our decimal would then be 1.35, which you know is over 1, which makes sense because that's over 100%. And then our fraction would be 1 and 35 hundredths, because again that's in the hundredths place, and then simplify that, divide by 5, 1 and 7/20. You notice that every time I'm centered around this decimal, okay, because going from a percent to a decimal is pretty easy, going from a fraction to a decimal is pretty easy, going from a decimal to percent, decimal to fraction, pretty easy. But going from a percent straight to a fraction or a fraction straight to a percent can sometimes be pretty tricky. So the decimal is kind of like our friend that kind of binds everyone together. All right, so we start with the decimal, we start with the percent. Now let's start with the fraction. So if I have a fraction, let's say 2/3, we know that to turn a fraction to a decimal, you actually do this all the time, turning a fraction to a decimal and then to a percent when I give you your test grades back and your quiz grades back. You divide the numerator by the denominator, okay? 2 divided by 3. So the easiest is to use your calculator. You could also do long division, but calculator is pretty easy. So I would type in 2 divided by 3. If I did long division, it would look like this. Okay. So you figure out how many times 3 goes into 20. Don't forget to add the decimal and the 0. And you quickly notice that it's starting to repeat. So the decimal for 2/3 is 0.6 repeating. And then once I have my decimal, remember the percent's pretty easy. You just slide it over twice. Now the tricky thing about repeating decimals is a common mistake is people will say, oh, this is 60%. But there isn't a 0 there. Remember, it's repeating, so there's 6's for forever. So this would be 66%, or if you're going to be very accurate, 66.6 repeating percent, because there's still 6's going forever. So if I move it over twice to right here, well, there's still 6's repeating after that. So even though I put 2 6's out here, all these 6's afterwards are still repeating. So 66.6 repeating percent is the correct percent for 2/3. All right, so that's converting fractions to decimals to percents. Let me give you some to practice. All right, so go ahead and fill in the missing ones. I've given you a decimal, so find the fraction of the percent, the fraction, so find the decimal in the percent, and the percent, so find the decimal in the fraction that are equivalent for these answers. Go ahead and pause it so you have a chance to work it out, and then hit play to get the answers. Alright, so let's look at these answers. So starting with the first one, the decimal. So to make that a percent, remember you'd slide it over twice. So if I slid this over twice and add a 0, that's 270%. To make it a fraction, that 2 is still a 2, so it's a whole 2, and 7/10. There's the first one. Second one, our fraction, 1/8. If you go ahead and divide 1 by 8, you get 0.125. To make that percent, I'd slide it over twice, so that's 12.5%. And the next one, 1.4%, remember you slide it the other direction twice and add a 0. So that would be 0.014, which makes sense because 1.4% is a very small amount. And the fraction would be 14 out of tens, hundreds, thousands. So 14 out of the thousands. And then simplify that down, we can divide by 2, so 7 out of 500 would be my final answer. Alright, so go ahead and check these and make sure you got them right. If you have any questions on these, mark them so you can ask about them in class. Alright, so next is percent problems. So let's look at some of these problems we can work out. Alright, so we're going to start in the best angle so you can actually see the problem that I'm looking at. Alright, so see right here it says, what is 24% of 550? So that's a basic percent problem. I'm going to show you two different ways you can do these. Okay, the first is the proportion method. Let me go ahead and write this problem down on my whiteboard so we don't have to keep the book here. So it's what is 24% of 550? Okay, book out of our way. Alright, so two methods, a little line so you can see both of them. And actually, let me do it this way and you'll see why in a second why I'm going to do it that way. Alright, so first the proportion method. So remember, proportion is just two fractions that equal each other, okay? Now with percents, it's pretty easy because there's automatically one number that's always going to be there, and that number is 100 because percents are out of 100, okay? The number that's going to go above 100 is going to be the percent because it's a percent out of 100. Makes sense. Over here, it's going to be a part over a whole. Okay? And the reason that makes sense is think about when you're taking your test grades, right? Your test grades are in a fraction. There's the part that you got right, the part that's the points you got out of the whole. If you get 100, that part's the same as the whole, right? You could get a 25 out of 25, which means you got 100%. You could have gotten a 24 out of 25. And then now you're trying to find your percent, okay? So a part over a whole. Now that's easy if it's a word problem like a test grade like I just gave you to figure out the part and the whole. But on a problem like this, it can be a little tricky. So there's some keywords that you should know, okay? The word is a keyword for the part, and the word of is the keyword for the whole. So a lot of times people will remember percent over 100 equals is over of. That's what people remember to be able to do percent proportions. If I were you, I would definitely write that down in your notes because that is very, very helpful for people to figure out problems. Okay, so percent over 100 equals is over of. So let's look at the problem we actually have and see what is what. So we have what is 24%. This right here is making it fairly obvious that this is the percent. So that's going to go in the percent slot. Then this says of 550. Well, if it's of 550, that means 550 is my whole. And that means I'm looking for the part. So x equals part. At this point, you're doing your cross products just like we normally do. Okay, so 100 times x is 100x equals 550 times 24. Just use your calculator like you normally do. So 550 times 24 is 13,200. Then do your reciprocal. When it's dividing by 100, that's pretty easy. Just knock off 2 zeros. So x equals 132. So 24% of 550 is 132. We found our part. Okay, so that's the proportion method. Now let me show you the other method. Let me first say that this method, I think, is the easiest for any type of problem. It's very, very good for word problems. Like we've seen, proportions are super helpful for word problems. And like you see, it's pretty easy to plug in the is and the of. Okay, you can just plug in the is for the part and the of for these problems. Okay, the next method I'm going to show you is setting up an equation, but it's not a proportion we're going to set up. Okay, and this method is pretty easy when it's a problem like this. It's a lot more confusing when it's a word problem, so keep that in mind, okay? All right, so this method is basically taking our sentence and translating it into an equation, much like we did when we were doing just those sentences to equations earlier. There's keywords, okay? So our keyword here, we got what is going to be our variable. Change that marker styling. So what is going to be our variable? Is, just like before when we were doing our translating our sentence, is equals. Percents, when we're doing this method, always have to be as a decimal. So remember, like we said, you slide it over twice. So this would be 0.24. Of, just like we were doing before, when we did translating our sentences, of always means multiply. And then our numbers just stay numbers, okay? So this is our equation. If your x isn't isolated, you need to solve to isolate it. Right now it is isolated, so all I have to do is 0.24 times 550. 0.24 times 550. And you punch in your calculator and you get 132, just like we did down here. Okay? So for these ones, it seems a lot easier. And so a lot of times people want to do this. When I personally do it, I use this method for these type of problems, and then for word problems I write a proportion. So you can do that. You can mix and match. You don't have to use the same method all the time. Okay, so I'm going to give you a problem so that you can practice it, and I don't really care which method you use. You can try both and see if you like it. Up to you. So the problem we'll do is 30 is 17% of what number? Use the number symbol. Alright, so go ahead and hit pause so you can work this out. I don't care which method you use. And then when you come back, I'll show you the answer. Alright, so let's work this out. I'm going to do it both methods so you can check yourself both ways. First, I'll show you if I was just translating it, the second method I showed you. So remember, the numbers are just numbers. The word is an equal sign, just like it always has been. The key is here, percents, you have to make decimals, so slide it over twice. Of means times. What number is the variable? So that's 30 equals 0.17 times x, or 0.17x. In this one, my x is not isolated, so you're going to need to solve it like you normally would solve. So I'm going to do 1 over 0.17, 1 over 0.17. So x would equal 30 divided by 0.7. So what I'm punching in my calculator is 30 divided by 0.17. And if I round it off, I get approximately 176.5. Alright, so that's that method. Let's show it with a proportion. I'll get the exact same answer. Woo! Losing all my markers. Alright, so remember, proportion, I have the percent over 100, and my percent is 17. And then the part over the whole, or is over of. The number I have is 30 is, so that's the part. Of what number? So I'm looking for my whole. So x equals whole. Okay. I'm going to do cross multiplying, so that's 3,000 equals 17x. Do my reciprocal, and I get x equals the same thing. Okay, so that's how it's set up, the proportion. Alright, let's try one more. Say 24 is what percent of 7? Alright, so go ahead and pause it, work it out. I don't care which method you use, and when you come back, I'll show you how to work it out. Alright, so let's take a look at this. So I'm going to do just the equation method first. So 24, marker is completely dead. 24 means equal. What percent is my x of times 7? So I'm going to rewrite that as 24 equals 7x. Okay. Then I need to solve for my x. So I'm going to do the reciprocal. That's not going to come out evenly, so I'm just going to go ahead and divide it. So I get 3.43 if I round it. Okay. This is the one where it's tricky if you use this. So what was I looking for? I was looking for what percent. So my x is percent. Okay. So, but remember, when you do this method, your percent comes out as a decimal. So my percent, my answer isn't 3.43%. That's not my answer. Remember, I'm going to need to slide it over twice to get my percent. So my actual answer is 343%. Okay? Which makes sense because 7 is my whole here and 24 is my part. Well, 24 is way more. If I got a 24 out of 7 on a test, I got a ton of extra credit. Okay, so 343% is my answer. If you're using this method, you have to be very aware that when you're doing it in here, your percents are decimals. If you're answering a percent, you need to slide it over. Okay, if you have trouble with that, that might be another reason to do the proportion because you don't have that problem in the proportion. So let's look at the proportion. So in the proportion, remember you got 100. And you're part over your whole. So I'm looking for my percent, so that's going over x. 24 is, so is over us, so is goes over the of 7. Don't automatically assume the part has to be smaller than the whole. The part can be bigger, right? You can get extra credit on the test. You can get more points than the total amount of points. So don't go into the habit of always putting the smaller number on top. You're going to mess it up then, okay? So this is our equation where our x is our percent. Cross multiply. Do the reciprocal, and x equals 343 if I round it. Okay, so again, what's nice about this method is that is our percent. That's our answer, 343%. You don't have to cite decimals or anything like that. So if the other method is confusing, I strongly recommend proportions. They're very simple to set up.